Okay, I think we are live. Welcome everyone to our webinar today on goal setting and achieving with a particular focus on health practitioners. And we're really excited, to present this topic. It's a juicy topic, and we're going to go through some strategies that have been found to really help achieve goals and things that you can implement straight away. And I think, as health practitioners, sometimes I don't know. I think we're reluctant to admit that we may not always practice the goal achieving and goal setting and achieving strategies that we perhaps teach our clients. So really good to be able to kind of get into that and to really look at it from a health focus, and also to look at it, as focused on us, as health practitioners, and rather than often that kind of third person where we're looking at how we help our clients. So. And of course, we know goal setting is important to everyone. And if you have a health practice or you're a health practitioner, then you're likely very busy and have lots of goals that sometimes can get left. So without further ado, let's jump right into it. Now, for those who might be new to Power Diary or to our webinars, my name is Damien Adler. I'm a co-founder of Power Diary and also a registered psychologist. In addition to Power Diary, and in fact, how Power Diary came to be. For many years, my wife and I actually we launched and ran a group psychology private practice. So we started out very small and grew that over the years. So I've got a lot of hands-on experience in utilizing tools, goal setting, and so forth in the direct application of growing health practices and also having a life at the same time. Now, very excited to have with me today Fiona, who is my co-host. So thank you very much, Fiona. Perhaps you'd like to tell people a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, thank you. I'm excited to be here too. I head up the strategy and communications here at Power Diary. My background includes building some businesses, and I've also worked previously with one of the big four consulting companies where I had the opportunity to help some of Australia's largest companies as a strategy consultant. And yeah, for the past few years, I've had the privilege of working with the amazing team here at Power Diary.
Very good. Thank you very much, Fiona. And now I'm going to jump into talking a little bit more about you and some of the things that you have achieved. And one of the reasons that, as when we were putting this together, I was, very excited about the idea of you coming on and joining us. And I'll just update the slide here because it seems to be stuck on there. There we go. So more about you here, Fiona. We're going to focus the spotlight on you for a second. But Fiona, you've achieved some truly sort of amazing things, and just to kind of list through them, and this is by no means an exhaustive list either, but you summited Mount Everest in 2006, so being the third Australian woman ever to do so, and yes, it is the Mount Everest. You have got a MBA, in addition, obviously, to your undergrad. You started and grew a online company called Word of Mouth Online, or some people might know it as WOMO. So that was sort of a business review site that you started from scratch and grew it to become, Australia's largest review site, which is absolutely phenomenal. So starting from zero reviews, nothing, to the most active platform. So that's amazing. Then you moved your whole family to France, and then lived there for 7 years. And I believe during that time, you also learnt to speak French, which I know from some of our earlier conversations was not necessarily something that came supernaturally that you felt. It wasn't just like clicks. And then through that time, in fact, while you were in France, you also then developed or discovered you had breast cancer and thyroid cancer, and went through the treatment, full treatment for both of those, and have since recovered your health and also your fitness, and continued on doing all these sort of amazing things. And so with all those there, I mean, you must be some kind of superwoman, right? There's a secret magic power that you have that allows you to kind of do this.
Absolutely not. No, just no.
No, okay.
In fact, I mean, I guess in relation to, the Everest thing, people, that's obviously the most sort of things that seems to stand out when I talk to people. But I was actually, if I think back to my, background prior to that, I was actually someone who was never thought of as very sporty. I was one of those kids that was, looking for an excuse to get out of, health or physical education classes at school, and skipping them when I could. And
you were last picked for teams then, I'm guessing. Like if you were,
Yep.
yeah, okay, you weren't the one that people were going for straight
No.
away. No, okay, gotcha.
Not at all, not at all. So it was literally, I mean, obviously I got into it, and it wasn't like I just went straight to, climb Mount Everest. It was a progression of little things leading to slightly bigger, and there was a huge progression. But yeah, when I went back to my old school after climbing Everest, I went to speak and to sort of, present on it. One of my old teachers said, you were always so stubborn. It's no surprise you climbed Everest. So that was her impression of me. And at first I was fairly offended at that.
Yeah.
But then I really thought, well, that's, I guess, what she's referring to as stubbornness, I can reframe that as persistence, which is, one of the strategies we'll sort of talk about here. And really, yeah, there's no magical sort of natural abilities or, being, born with certain traits or anything. It's really just, I guess, avoiding some of the traps of goal setting, I think, and achieving them, and then applying some strategies that actually work. And it's not to say that they've worked every time, or it's not to say that I think they do work every time actually, but it's not to say that I'm successfully able to apply them every time. But yeah, hopefully what we'll go through today will be of some help to the people, everyone here listening.
Yeah. Exactly.
But yourself as well, you've achieved some pretty incredible things as well. You've had a career path which has been out of the ordinary. You've had in your career in public sphere hospitals, you've ruffled a few feathers, you've started a group practice from nothing, and against all advice taken a different approach which ended up being very successful. And of course growing Power Diary, starting from basically nothing and growing that to a platform that's used globally by thousands and thousands of allied health professionals with local operations in each country. I'm sure those things were pretty easy to do.
Yeah, look, I think, very similar to you, that the, each of those things that I've done and that, I feel sort of, proud about, really they've come about by, applying, the sort of strategies that we're going to go through today, and some people will have sort of heard of before, and it's really that kind of idea that there are these sort of things that are commonalities when you achieve a goal, and we've certainly in the few months that we've been preparing this presentation, where we've been really looking at what those overlaps are, and we found that with these things that you achieve that are hard, anything worthwhile is not easy, right? But there's always there's a thread there of common things that kind of lead to that sort of attainment, and very much like you, and I think it's a point I kind of want to make, about that. Even though we've achieved separate things that are great, it doesn't mean that you get it right every time. And I mean, there's plenty of goals actually that I've set and I haven't achieved. Even recently, there's last year, or there'll be things that I had intended to do that I wanted to achieve and just haven't. So when I look at that, why? It's usually because I missed one of these kind of steps or one of these phases. But I think it's important to kind of to realize that it's not. And so sometimes you see people selling these kind of solutions, almost like this is a magic thing, and it will work, with low effort, and it always be successful. But it's not like that. So why talk about goals? I think there are things that really do separate. I think the sort of difference, between those who sort of achieve things and those who find themselves sort of routinely kind of frustrating, or frustrated, by not achieving things. So that's important. And the other thing why I think for this particular group and why I want to cover this is really around that we often some health professions will receive some training on how we can help other people achieve goals, and we might be kind of comfortable with that, but rarely do we actually receive any information. It's really directed at us, and that I think that's often the case. So I really want to sort of jump in and spend a little bit of time on that with our lovely webinar participants. So yeah, that's really what's sort of driving that need. So let's jump into looking at how what goals sort of mean in terms of the future. And I think you had some things you wanted to talk about with
yeah,
this.
well, just really quickly, I think mastering the this skill of setting and achieving goals is arguably one of the most important skills we can learn. And I think it is a skill. It's not sort of a trait or anything like that. But it's also easy, if we're not successful in this, to easily sort of get into a negative cycle with this. We set a goal, we don't have good strategies or any strategies, we fail to achieve the goal. It sort of leads to us having reduced confidence and feeling frustrated. Then we've got a reduced propensity to set goals. We set lower goals, and then perhaps don't achieve those. And down we go into this cycle where we really just don't believe in goals and don't think that they can sort of pull us forward. Mm-hmm. And of course, what we want is the opposite cycle, where we set a goal. We have some strategies, we make good progress, we have increased confidence and increased commitment to them, which of course leads to a much more higher chance of us succeeding in them.
Yeah.
So that's all I really wanted to say there. And I think it's valuable for anyone, no matter where they are on that sort of journey towards sort of learning how to set and achieve goals.
Yeah, I think it's sort of sad too. Like sometimes if people have been trapped in that negative cycle for a bit, losing that confidence in their ability, they almost sort of start to make inferences about themselves, like, oh, I'm hopeless. I never stick to anything. Like, let's not, I'm not going to bother now. And there's that deflated.
Tried that, didn't work.
Exactly. Yeah. And I know certainly over the years, dealing, and working with, Power Diary customers, it's interesting. That you'll see sometimes people have felt that way with their practices. They're kind of, I've tried this and I've wanted to achieve certain goals with it, and they've sort of almost been stuck in the same kind of rut, and then have lost confidence around it. So it can happen to anyone, even if we're in the business of helping other people. It doesn't make us immune to those same negative
and it's not a
cycles.
reflection of their intelligence, their work ethic, their anything. It's just they haven't quite grasped this particular aspect.
Yeah, that's right.
But I guess the reason for that is that achieving goals is really hard. I mean, we probably, often when we set a goal, we feel really energized, excited, enthused about it all. We're ready to go. But, in reality, the success rates are really, really low. And we've all heard different figures about these, but, typical ones are that 40 to 50% of people make a New Year's resolution. And, after about 1 week, maybe 2 weeks, it's gone away. And, they haven't met it, and they've dropped totally off the bandwagon. They're no longer even striving towards that goal. And, there's also stats about in January, everyone's starting up. The membership in gyms goes way up, health clubs, dietary products, all of that sort of stuff. Sales go up. Sales of alcohol and chocolate often go down, but that doesn't last long either. So it's hard work, and these are things that are just easy to measure, of course. But even the black and white way these types of stats are presented to us shows the way that most people approach goals is totally the wrong way. So we'll go into some of that in a minute, but I guess we just wanted to reiterate that, by definition, goals are difficult. Like, we don't set goals that are already part of our habits. Like, we're not setting a goal to brush our teeth every day or to get to work on time for most of us. It's just stuff that we're doing. It's the hard things that we want to sort of reach towards that we're not already doing, or that we're doing and we perhaps shouldn't be doing, that are hard. So, it's by definition, they're hard. So, I think it just helps to recognize that and not expect the process to necessarily be easy either. But I think, there are, if we think of the successful people that we might admire, whether they're, I don't know, politicians, they're entrepreneurs, sports people, anything, they would all put down, goal setting and achieving as one of their, they might not even say it that way, but that if we look at their process, that would be what they do. But
Yeah.
and they would say, most of them would say anyway, that they're not exceptional people by nature, but they just have a process and a method that is working for them.
Yeah.
So
it's and I think that idea that those sort of people that might stand out as achieving goals. I mean, and I remind myself of this all the time, is that they all have the same 24 hours that we do, right? And I find that a good touchstone to come to, because if I'm doing something that I have that niggling feeling isn't that efficient or isn't that good, I'll sometimes think, like, with such and such, whoever it might be, that I kind of hold in high esteem in this way, think, would they be spending their time doing this? And if not, what would they be doing differently? Because clearly they'd be spending their time doing something different if they're getting different outcomes. So, I think it's a good reminder, and means, to me anyway, it makes it feel more achievable. Like, when we think about, there is, we've got the same 24 hours. So it's just a matter of what we're actually doing with those 24 hours. So if we look at, to get into some of the sort of common goal setting mistakes, this is a good, we'll sort of start with the mistakes, and then we'll actually go into some of the strategies that work. But first one, of course, is just not having any goals. And this is what happens, for some people, either they've never been in the habit of it, or, like we were saying before, have sort of lost their confidence in achieving goals, so then they just don't set them anymore. So if you don't have a goal to start with, well, we can be fairly 100% confident you're not going to achieve it. Having goals that are too sort of vague, and I think we've all been there, but where we might really more have a wish. I think, it's just like, I would like to be, or wouldn't be nice, it's a daydream, rather than a sort of a goal really is sort of tightly defined and time bound where possible, and, really focus, exactly what that is. Then conversely, having too many goals, and look, I'm guilty of this, and I'm a repeat offender. So, it's, I have some lessons I have to learn many, many times, and this is one of them. I'll end up, setting sort of too many goals, and of course, we know that we only have X amount of attention, energy, and focus, and it just gets diversified. So if you have low intensity, essentially, in each area, because it's been divided up too much, then really you sort of don't achieve anything. And I often look at it, when I'm trying to remind myself of this, I think about it like a magnifying glass. If you get a magnifying glass and you're only capturing a very small amount of sun, but if you focus that small amount of sun into a single dot point, then it gets hot enough, right? That's how you start a fire, right? And so, just that singular focus on something can really create a lot of heat and intensity. But if you've got the magnifying, glass up, and you're spreading that bit of light across a lot of things, really the temperature underneath doesn't really change at all. And I'll often sort of just think about that as a way of reminding myself that really you have to focus in on a few things and do them well. The next one is around, they'll use a sort of mistake, very common, set and forget. So, they kind of set it. What we mean, there's some things that are good, set and forget, some routines and so forth. But in this case, it's, set the goal, usually around, start of the new year or whatever it might be, spike in enthusiasm, to do something, and then never come back to it. Right? It's never planned, never really incorporated into the rhythms of the person's life, and therefore it gets forgotten, because life's busy, and we usually have to create space for goals and for achievement, because mostly our lives are busy with other things. So it just sort of disappears, and we see this extremely commonly, and it's something that we've got to be on the lookout for.
I guess we just have to remember we're not naturally doing these things. That's why we've set them as goals, and we've got to be, super deliberate.
Exactly, because they're not things forced on us, right? The things that are forced on us, that we do them, right? But these are the things that are value adds that make the real difference. And linked to that, is not having an implementation approach. So they're never broken down, right, into actions. And the last couple we've got here is around the focus is really about on outcomes, and this is a really common one, and it's slightly tricky, because part of goal setting is to think about the outcome that we want, but actually the focus and the day-to-day focus really needs to be on the inputs. to that rather than on just the outcome, because it's the inputs that ultimately are going to make a difference. And then finally, there's a lack of emotional connection. So if we look at people who don't achieve goals and what the difference between those who do and those who don't are, what you'll find is that the people that didn't achieve goals typically were never that emotionally connected to the goal, and that means that it might be they have a vague desire for something, but they never really sort of stopped and spent the time thinking about what would it mean, for me to achieve that. How would I feel? What would be different? And really get that kind of emotional buy-in to a goal, so it becomes something that's really tangible, real, and emotional. Like ultimately, we're emotional creatures, and as much as we like to overlay logic, we we often act emotionally, and then we use the logic to justify it afterwards. And so getting that emotional bond when people don't do that, that's highly correlated with not achieving the goal. So just quickly, some things we thought would outline to demonstrate, because if we can pick up on these straight away, you can look at, okay, there's some areas that we can often get derailed. All right, so let's shift gears now and look at goal setting and achievement, and look at the strategies that actually work rather than just the pitfalls of what things we all can do wrong. So looking, let's kick off here with this sort of, to get, super clear on this.
Yeah. And this is really difficult. Like, I think people think that their goals, they should just naturally kind of know their goals, but it's not usually something that you would immediately know, or that might be immediately obvious. And, thinking about what your goals should be, or could be and should be, takes some time and deliberate thought. So one way of doing this is to, set aside some time, actually, have that carved out space in a day. It might be a lunch hour, or it might be, a couple of lunch hours over the course of a week, or, maybe it's a few hours in one day, where you actually sit down and you think about, perhaps writing down on a piece of paper, listing out what went well, what hasn't gone well, what did you love, what would you want to change about your sort of life at the moment, both, professionally and personally, perhaps. And literally just writing out different things, perhaps having 2 columns on your page, and just doing a kind of a brain dump of where we are at the moment. And then perhaps taking that and thinking about what could be the most important and most impactful areas, or the most impactful change that I could make. Like, rather than, like we were saying, choosing these 17 different things that I want to fix, let's, which I do have that same propensity as well, to choose way too many things and bite off more than I can chew, which doesn't work so well, is to really just, think about, if I could only do one thing, what would it be? If I could only do 2 things, maybe what would it be? And maybe leave it at that, if I could achieve these 2 things. And the reason is, I actually like this little diagram I put in here on the right, because if the image on the left with that sort of scattered energy, like if you added up the length of all of those arrows, they're probably the same as that longer arrow, but you haven't made much progress in any one of those areas. Whereas if you focus your energy, obviously you can go a lot further with in one direction. And sometimes that has a sort of a knock-on effect in other areas anyway. And other times you can say, okay, well, I've done that, and then the next year or the next quarter or the next whatever, you can sort of change the focus. But doing one thing at a time, or few things at a time, makes a huge difference.
And we actually use this in Power Diary, which and this particular approach is really, I think, nicely driven
as much as possible
by you, because you remind us of this all the time, right? Like,
I do.
Hey, if we've got all these sort of projects that we're all working on, but none are actually live in the field and making a difference to our customers, then all of that effort, although eventually they'll all be done, but in the meantime, that value isn't being delivered to our customers. And I think this is one that reminder, hey, if we focus on fewer things, delivering and getting those into the hands of customers so they're benefiting from that, we actually, it's better for everyone. And it's so it's one I know you're very good at, kids, drilling this home, for us. But it makes such a difference. I mean, it's very, very true.
Yeah, because we've all got, I don't know, there's reasons we don't like to sometimes finish tasks, and we start a new one, or we have, work on something that's halfway done. And forcing ourselves just to keep the focus and actually get something out the door is often important. But another thing I like to think about here is projecting forward and sort of imagining yourself, perhaps that you're at a dinner party a year from now, you meet up with someone, a friend you haven't seen all year, and they ask, how was your year? What's happened? And you say, really good, because, and then what would you like to be saying then? If you can sort of think about it from that frame of mind or point of view, I'm trying to say, then it kind of helps you think, well, how do I want to reflect on my year in a year from now? So that can be useful as well. But then the important part here is to really articulate the goal or the goals in writing. So, being as clear as possible. And we've all heard those sort of stats about people that, write down their goals versus ones that don't. So I won't repeat those again, but, just thinking about the one or two goals, perhaps there's one business or one professional and one personal goal that you might set, and getting as clear as possible in writing as you can with them.
Yeah. And again, I think, with Power Diary right from the start, we did this, very kind of clearly and deliberately, what do we want to, how do we want this system, what impact do we want it to make for health, professionals? And, literally Dot pointed it out, what does that look like when done well? And obviously we've refined and tweaked things over the years, but I think the same actually with our when my wife and I started our private practice, we were like crystal clear at the start when we set the goal that we wanted to build it in a way that it would scale, and that it was, while initially it would be reliant on our our direct billings and our direct consultation, that was really just step one to sort of prove the concept of what we were doing, but everything was built around the idea of it being able to be a group, being a group practice, essentially, to create an atmosphere with this group, and that the revenue from that was not going to be linked to the amount of consulting hours that Beck and I put in. So being that sort of crystal clear, again, it's a commonality I've seen in any other things that I've achieved that I consider worthwhile. That's something that is always there at the foundation. Yeah. It's good.
And very related is the next point, I think, actually.
Yes.
Which is,
I'll just.
which is really, well, I think if you actually use that word about being able to see, clearly how this looks. And I would really take this as far as going to, really practicing the sort of the art of visualizing what that really looks like. And this helps set us on a mental course and influences our behavior. And it might seem a little bit airy-fairy and a bit, daydreamy, but there's actually more and more really hard science behind this. And if you look at figures, something like 70 to 90% of Olympians now regularly practice visualization techniques. And it's not that they say, oh, yes, I do it. Their coach will say, okay, in the morning you do this physical training, then you have your breakfast, then you do your, I'm just making this up, of course, but then you do your, this visualization, and you do this other visualization, then you do this other training, then you do this other visualization, and then you have a rest, and then their day has these visualizations structured into it. And really it's been defined as just creating an event or scene in your mind. But the point here is, and I've done this for certain things, and it's actually quite hard to do. Because again, by definition, this goal that you've set is probably something that you probably haven't experienced before. So you can't, it really takes some work to kind of imagine it in real life, in pictures. And so, the idea is to really picture parts of the goal in your mind. So it could be, in this context, like imagine walking into your clinic in the future state that you picture it. Maybe do you have extra team members? Are you in a different premise? Maybe you're working from home. It could be all different kinds of things, but how do you actually see that? Or what do you see when you look at your calendar? Is it full if you're wanting more clients right now, or is it got a lot of space in it because you're wanting to cut back down and have other people do certain things, or have less actual rostered hours on. So what kind of week are you looking for? Perhaps what time do you leave? Can you actually picture yourself getting up at whatever time and leaving your clinic? So, or perhaps there's no paperwork and all of your notes are up to date. Perhaps you can sort of see those piles of paper. You can see the clean desk in front of you.
Perhaps you've gone paperless,
Exactly.
You've implemented an amazing practice management system, and you're paperless, for example. Yeah.
Yeah. And also experts tell us that we should not just visualize the end result that we're looking for, but we should also visualize the process, and also the process when it's hard. So often the example used here is, say your goal is to run a marathon. You don't just sort of visualize yourself crossing the line and everyone, cheering you on. You visualize yourself getting up in the dark when it's raining and doing, when you don't feel like it, when your legs are heavy from the run yesterday, and actually still walking out the door and starting your jog. So, in this case, I don't know, if you're wanting to grow your team, maybe you imagine yourself reviewing resumes and interviewing team members, or, proactively marketing or doing business development sort of work, or presenting to local groups and things. Or maybe you're working on your website and you're learning how to use WordPress or whatever it might be. But, you can actually imagine yourself doing those actual things that are going to be what it takes to achieve whatever goal you might have set.
Yeah, and I think the point you're making before too, I think is a good one. That sometimes it seems airy-fairy because you see this idea of visualizing, like you see it pop up in like pop psychology things, and you see it as a kind of, and I think it actually kind of, when you see it in that context, it kind of cheapens it, because the real power of it is not often communicated. The real reason that works is not often communicated, and often it's almost presented like, oh, it's just magic, right? Visualize, and then these things magically appear. But as you were saying, there's real brain changes that are occurring. And one of the things that I notice a lot when I'm visualizing well is that when I'm making decisions, if I'm making a decision or doing a behavior that is inconsistent with that goal, there's like these alarm bells that kind of go off, because it feels, like, oh, these two things don't coexist, right? And so it's like a warning system, for me, where I think if I was just vaguely wanting to achieve something and not really visualizing it, it wouldn't have anywhere near the impact. There wouldn't be that alarm system, because it's almost like, visualizing tricks your brain into sort of thinking you've already achieved it. Or if you're visualizing getting out in the rain and going for the and training for the marathon, your brain actually thinks, oh, if you visualize that enough, oh, I've got out in the rain many times, right? It's like, that's just what I do, right? Because the brain actually has the trouble sometimes distinguishing between a visualization or an imagination versus reality. It's why there's problems with eyewitness testimony and things like that, because people, our brains aren't that good at distinguishing between real memories and things that we've imagined. So we can use that to our advantage, and this visualization, it's sort of so much more powerful than often the way it gets kind of thrown around. It's truly it can be life-changing.
Yeah. So, I think that also leads into the next one with the identity type sort of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is the sort of creating this sort of the emotional kind of connection. So when we're imagining and we're visualizing what that achievement would be like, and we're also trying to get into the emotional state of that achievement, so it feels really really kind of positive, and we get that sort of connection to it. But also, like, we can actually use a negative emotional state with goals, as a motivator as well. And look, as a psychologist, I'm of course always, we're always trying to encourage people to harness the positive, right? But also, I think harness whatever works for you, right? So sometimes I'll find that no matter how much I might want to try and use like a positive emotional state to achieve something, I will sometimes use a negative emotional state to achieve something. So, sort of thinking about an example of this, well, a few years ago. So I've got, there's myself and two older brothers, and I've got other siblings as well. But in this case, we've got two older brothers, and we were going on a trek that was going to be quite sort of challenging, physically challenging. And I sort of made a fairly, late decision that I would go as well. And, this is going to be in a group. And I've got to tell you, I was really, I had to do a lot of training. And the only way that I got really motivated was I had in my mind, like, how embarrassing, right, it would be to be like the younger brother who just like didn't train enough, kind of slowed the group down. And it was like, didn't put in the effort. And I just thought, gee, that, if, I could visualize how bad that would be, right? I was thinking, I do not want to be that guy in the group that really is needing to be looked after, or is, and so that idea of that and the negative emotion attached to that was the most powerful motivator, right? To keep, like, when I felt like I didn't want to train and didn't want to, that was like, no, which is worse, like getting out there now and training because when I don't feel like it, or I'd imagine being a scenario where I'm holding up the group and so you can use that. It works, and I think go for it, right? If you just find whatever drives you, whatever really helps you kind of move forward with something, utilize that. And by the way, it was an awesome trip. It was great. I felt really fit and felt really on top of it when I went. So it's not like you stay in that emotional state. So that's and then if there are other ways you can tap into things about using kind of affirmations or positive self-talk as well, that can help, or any kind of use like identity-based sort of statements or thoughts to kind of, and I think you've got some sort of thoughts around how to do that effectively. What do you find?
Thinking about affirmations when I was trying to learn French, and as you sort of talking before, I found that very difficult, very awkward for me. It wasn't something that came naturally at all. And so, I remember hearing someone say, oh, you should use affirmations. And again, they can sound a bit airy-fairy, but what I actually learned was the nuance here is like, if I used a statement like, I speak French fluently or comfortably, it felt completely wrong. My brain would just go, no, you don't, you're hopeless.
Right.
Literally.
Yep.
But a statement, if I could sort of rephrase that to a statement that, I didn't reject. So it was something like, I'm getting better at French every day and taking more opportunities to practice whenever I can. That would sit more comfortably with me, and I could sort of accept that, and it would sort of, make me feel more confident, and, it actually made me look for opportunities to practice whenever I could, because I'm now saying this thing to myself. So, phrasing that in the right way is really important.
And it, and I think that's where it goes wrong often, doesn't it? With ones that when people just say positive things, affirmations, is that there's no connection with them, because your brain just is like, whatever, like they're empty, like empty sort of, and look, some people say that still works, whatever. I mean, I'm the same as you. I find unless it's sort of realistic and I can kind of get in touch with it, then
I've heard people say there's like a ladder, so if you might have where you want to be right at the top, but you've got to sort of take the steps, and so maybe you put the affirmation is 2 or 3 steps ahead of where you are now, but it's got to be believable, something you can actually see.
Yeah, that makes sense. So that brings us to defining the goal and doing it a little bit differently than what we might.
So where you can, I mean, it does depend on the goal a bit, I think, but I don't know how many people here have read James Clear's Atomic Habits or heard him speak, but he would say you don't need goals, you need systems, and we shouldn't focus too much on the end result, but just focus on the inputs. So, and depending on the goal, I really agree with this approach. So, because a lot of goals that we might have, we might like to admit this, but we don't actually directly affect the outcome. We don't have full control over it. So say you want to lose weight, for instance, you don't, on any given day, you don't really control what you weigh on that scale. But what you do control is what you've eaten, your exercise, and those sorts of things. But you can still sometimes do all the right things and have not a positive result, and sometimes the opposite can happen as well, because there's a whole lot of other factors that are in play as well, and that can be with other things as well. You can have a goal of reaching certain revenue levels, but you don't completely control that. That's not something that you can't sort of make clients ring up and book. But you could have a goal to reach out to a certain number of referrers, or invest half a day in marketing per week, or in the case of health, it could be you have a goal to eat salad 4 days a week, or walk a certain number of steps, or those types of things. So reframing it in terms of what we can actually do, and then that sort of leads in with some of the other things that we're talking about too, is like the tracking and sort of seeing the progress as well.
Yeah, and I think with that too, if you take weight loss as a good example, that when you're focusing sort of on the inputs, it also is more likely to lead to sustaining that behavior post whatever the achievement is. So sometimes that idea that people might put these kind of short-term unsustainable effort or focus or behavior to achieve something. So we're thinking of weight loss, and yo-yo dieting is a good example. Someone might, if they just focus on the outcome, I want to be weigh X kilos. Well, I mean, there's lots of ways to achieve that, and many of them are not very healthy, right? And so by focusing kind of on the inputs, I think it forces us to sort of develop the habits that then I think of them like levers that we can pull that are likely to get that that result. And I think the reward mechanism is better too, right? Because if the goal, and the way we define it is around performing the behaviors that achieve an outcome, then the achievement of that day to day is a positive feedback loop. Like it's actually closing the loop each day.
Yeah.
I said to that. So because the end result, that could be some time off, right? Like the gratification element, maybe, and exercise and diet's a good example that. The actual result of when we start to feel better, is delayed. And certainly with business, I mean, most things are not overnight success or one strategy that kind of changes everything. It's usually a sort of common accumulation of them. And so when it's about the achievement or doing the thing each day, we get that, I find anyway, that motivates me because I'm like, okay, well, I've done this, I've done that, and hopefully that's going to lead to this. And of course, most of the time it does, but I find that a lot easier. The other thing around this side of thing, I think is around focusing on seeing the struggle and getting through the struggle as not only expected but also worthwhile. And that's sort of a little hard, in a way, because we'd like to achieve things without struggle, but if we kind of go into it with the expectation that, okay, some of this is going to be really hard, and sometimes I'm really not going to want to do it, but if I can do it, if I can achieve it despite feeling that way, I think it sort of almost allows that those difficulties to kind of coexist. It's not like, oh, I really don't want to do it, I won't do it. It's sort of, I think that it provides a better pathway through it, and then of course you get the reward of, well, actually, okay, it was difficult, but I did it. And that becomes, the tick, rather than, well, if you think about it in weight terms, for instance, well, that walk I did, might have, almost no overall, change. That one walk, may not, but when we look at it as, okay, I've achieved that for today, I've done what I can for today, then, it seems to, it's definitely linked to doing better and being able to kind of be more on track. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about sort of translating goals into these sort of daily actions, because really it doesn't really matter how sort of great the goal is, right? Nothing kind of really happens without action. And this sort of, I mean, over the years with business in particular, I used to think that ideas were really valuable, like a business idea or an app idea or whatever, right? Like I used to think that's really valuable, and I'd be almost like secretive about, talking about it to people or what, not because I thought the idea actually had the value and someone else would take it and run with it. But actually, what I've learned, and I think it's pretty universal. I think I'm just probably late to the party on this one, right? But the idea actually doesn't. Most ideas, are absolutely worthless without the action, without the execution, right? And it's like when people try and people pitch app ideas to us all the time, like of things, and you're like, okay, well, but it's the execution that's hard, right? And it's the execution where the value happens. And with goals, we need like the action and the execution on that. And so it needs to really kind of be, broken down. So, the goal sort of, you've got to think about what are the actions that are going to kind of move you kind of closer, and keep them, so that every day you're doing things that kind of contribute to that. And it really doesn't matter like what the size of those actions are each day, because it will take you step by step. I once ran a webinar on not a webinar, actually, it was before webinars. It was an in-person event on goal setting and achievement, and we had about 20 people, and one of them had the goal to write a book, right? Like she wanted to author a book, and had said all the normal things: no time, no focus, etc. And we ended up breaking that person's goal right down into, I think it was that she had time to write a paragraph a day or something, right? And interestingly, about maybe 18 months after that, she actually sent me a manuscript, right, and said, this has gone to the editor and publisher or whatnot, and even the tiny little bits that she could do every day, it eventually worked into that. And I think the amount of time, sometimes that like we really shouldn't try and be doing too much, right? And I think you've got some thoughts around this, right? Like not to overdo it.
Absolutely. Like really, I mean, I actually think not even that it doesn't matter how big or small, like really try and make them small, these actions.
Okay,
because if you define them as too big, then it leads to procrastination. They're too hard for us. Like I think we overestimate how good we are at doing things. Like say you want to have a focus on marketing for your practice, and one of your tasks you say is, okay, update my website. You might think that's one part of it, but that is huge. Like that's way too big. You can't have that as an action. Like you've got to literally break that down into something tiny. So it might be just find 3 web designers, or find another website I like, or write a crappy first version of my about page, or just do some tiny little task that's going to incrementally add up. And if you do that each day, each week, it's going to have the cumulative effect of being something huge.
And it actually ties nicely to the way executive functioning works in our brain too, that sequencing events is one of the reasons that we don't start something or procrastinate, because like say updating my website, well, what do I start first? Where do I, what? It's very hard for our brain to kind of attack that, and address it, so it kind of gets put off. Where if you've broken that down, then there is a sequence to it, because you've written that.
I had to admit this, but just recently I was procrastinating on a task I needed to do, and others were waiting on it, and for whatever reason I was just feeling a bit daunted by it and kept putting it off. And so I sort of started thinking, well, what can I do here? Like, I've just got to somehow get to this. So I thought, what is the very tiniest step I can do to sort of get myself going in this direction? And in this case, it was literally, find the file I need to work on. Like find, go to my emails or messages or whatever it was, and find that file and open it. And, I didn't actually do any work, but okay, now. But actually, that was taking up enough mental energy that was stopping me from doing the work. Once I actually did that small part, the rest of it, started to flow. It wasn't as hard as I had thought.
And that's the case often, isn't it? Once you do the first thing, then the rest of it just it flows on.
Yeah, exactly. So identifying a few really small tasks, and again, not too many, but and not too big, and then just really, I guess this is this point, taking small action consistently. Right. So this is actually, the previous one was about identifying the actions. This is actually doing them. And, I really believe that the rewards are in the doing. Like, even if we get the doing wrong some of the time, half the time, if we don't do, nothing happens. So this is, really close to my heart. But I think, it's still hard to do things. Like, it's still like, again, these things are on our list because on our part of our goals because they're not coming naturally to us.
Yeah.
So I guess there's some sort of techniques, some tactics that, I think help us with this. So one thing that I find very useful is just kind of the Pomodoro technique. It's, just to say, I'm going to set a timer, 30 minutes, 40 minutes, whatever you think, but don't, overestimate yourself. It's better to go too short than too long, and just commit to staying with that task for that amount of time. Even if you're, I don't know, staring at an empty piece of paper, a blank piece of paper or a blank screen, and you're not sure what to do, you're still thinking about that problem for that amount of time. And of course, you're probably not going to end up doing that, but just to say, well, this is all I'm going to do. I'm just going to commit this time to this thing. Another one is to remove distractions, and this will be nothing new to people. We've all heard about turning off notifications, shutting down our browser tabs, so we've got focus. But who actually does this? It's not that many of us.
No.
Hear this advice and don't do it. So I really do think, I've recently started, one of my bad habits is having 1,000 browser tabs open. So, but now I still can't bear to close them, of course, the world might end or something. But I sort of hide them away in groups, and so I can sort of have one tab that I'm working on that I can really get that focus going. So that helps me, and I think having putting on Do Not Disturb for a period of time does also help as well. So I really encourage everyone to try those things and see why they keep getting recommended. And the third point here we've got is sort of, well, third and fourth really, sort of gamifying the whole thing, like setting yourself rewards or restrictions. So, the carrot or the stick or both. So maybe it's like, if you do your 30 minutes of this task, then you'll give yourself a little reward, 10 minutes of social media, or you'll call a friend, or you'll do a task that you won't do the task that you actually want to do until you've done the task that you don't want to do.
Yes.
So it could be something like that, or it could be restricting as well. So it could be saying, I'm not going to get a coffee, or I'm not going to have lunch until I'm done with this thing, or I've got the first draft down, or I've sent that email that I'm putting off for whatever reason. So yeah, I think, sometimes, thinking about how we might manage or approach, children, like sometimes all of those tasks, all of those techniques apply to ourselves as well, much as we might not want to admit it. And then, of course, I suppose probably the last point there is really important too, like building them into our daily routine. So having a time of day, perhaps when you work on a certain task or a certain type of task, or having apps that sort of remind you and help you be consistent with that. Having time set aside for them as well can help enormously as well.
Yeah. And the other one that I like as well, personally, is I like doing crappy versions of things to start with, right?
Yeah.
Because otherwise, I'll get too caught up in trying to do something right and do it, be perfectionistic about it, or try and, but that idea of, what, I'm just going to do a crappy version. And it's amazing then how much easier it is, like just to then
it's much easier to fix a crappy version than exactly. Or else if I don't know how to start something, say, well, just start in the middle. Just don't start at the start. Start later.
Yeah, absolutely. And if it's a writing task and I can't think of like the right way to link it to the next thing, I'll just put in like some hashes or something, and then just go on with the next thought, and make no effort at all to start with to link it or to make it make any sense. And the other thing I like here is that point around, I often think about, in extreme circumstances, how would you achieve X if you had a limited amount of time? So, there's something that needs to be done that normally you might plan for 3 months. Well, what if I said, like, it had to be done this week, like, life and death kind of had to be done? What would you actually do? And often it focuses your brain on in technology, we'd call it an MVP. So, a minimal viable product. So what's the skeleton of this that would still be useful and would be usable? So what's the bare bones of something? And often if we focus on achieving that first, if it's a task, then we'll be able to kind of move forward. We'll be able to get we'll be able to build on that afterwards, but it makes it sort of really easy to begin with. So looking at tracking progress, okay, as sort of next point here is that we want to think about metrics that will be the most useful to reinforce the behavior, the actions, right? So there isn't one sort of metric or one, you know, like we think about, so, you know, often with weight, you know, people are going to think about, you know, what the scale says. But again, if we break, you know, and change the metric to be about the number of times in a week that we may have, you know, gone for a walk, or the number of steps we've taken a day, maybe it's the number of letters we send, maybe it's around the number of days a week that we have our notes completed before we leave, you know, finish up for the day, you know, consulting. So, and then, you know, track that. So just find what metric and think about what metric is most important in terms of inputs and outputs. So what's having that impact, and then what's most motivating for you. So if you go home and go, okay, I've achieved these things, and you find that, you know, then track that, because keeping that that going and feeding yourself that information, it'll keep you focused on the right things, and also then, you know, help with motivation. So it sort of keeps us, you know, it keeps us driving driving forward. Now, if we look at the next one around staying on track, how do you do this, Fiona?
Yeah.
How on earth do we stay on track?
Yeah, well, I think it's important, because most people really literally forget about their goals. Like in their day-to-day life, they've forgotten. They're not sort of, you know, acting on them. They're not top of mind. So first thing is scheduling perhaps a weekly review time, perhaps blocking in a point on your calendar. It might be an evening or part of the day where you actually just read over your goals and think about them, think about the next actions that are going to help move you towards those. So that, I think, is really important. The last point here is using some sort of visual reminders, or not necessarily all visual, I guess, but putting, you know, just simple things, post-it notes on your computer screen or your bathroom mirror, so that you see them when you wake up in the morning and you're brushing your teeth or doing your hair and all that sort of stuff. You can actually read these things, and it's just going into your brain all the time. Having a message on your phone lock screen, so that you're just seeing it regularly throughout your day, or perhaps an alarm reminder. Perhaps there's you know, I have an alarm telling me to go to bed. It doesn't always work, but
I actually have that too.
Matter of sleep.
I have that. It tells me 45 minutes before, start the wind down now, because I'll try and
Yeah, so things that you need to remember at a certain time of day, that's perfect for a regular alarm reminder. I mean, some people have like just a random time, like 2:13 in the afternoon. They sort of say, here's what your goals are, and, you know, it's kind of, that can work as well. And also some people find that tokens can be really useful. Like it might be, I don't know, a piece of jewelry or a mug that they use, or a t-shirt that's sort of got something on it that reminds them of where they're heading. That can help as well.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just mindful of time. We've sort of running out a little bit, but
we are actually right near the end here. So I think we're really down now to a few extra tips, if you like. So those, you know, 8 things we've talked about are sort of the ones that are kind of, you know, critical. Cool. But if we look at this here, you know, there are a few extra things that I think are linked to, you know, achieving and you know, correlate with getting where you want to be. So first of all, you know yourself. So think about other times that you've been successful in the past, and think about what worked. Like, why did you achieve that thing? You know, and it might be a recent example, it might be years ago, but think about something you've achieved and go, what was it about that? And try and be really honest with yourself about what it was that was motivating, what was different in how you approached it. And if it turns out that it was external pressure or external factors, that's fine. If that works for you, use that. So how do you recreate that same sort of environment to achieve what you want to do now? So it's not a matter of being judgmental or there's a right and wrong way, but just know what works for you. And it's sometimes, you know, it's funny, we don't think of looking to our own past to look at success. We're good at looking at it in terms of, you know, beating ourselves up about what we did wrong or, you know, whatnot, but think about it in terms of success. And then there's, I think with the looking at the tendencies, there's kind of 4, you know, things here. And I think you really kind of connect with this quite well, right? About how these
this is
work.
An author, Gretchen Rubin, who has this framework where she puts people into these 4 tendencies, and it's about how they respond to expectations. So yeah, there's upholders respond readily to both outer and inner expectations of themselves. Questioners question all expectations, so they'll only meet an expectation if they think it makes sense. They need to know a lot of facts and data and supporting, evidence. Obligers tend to meet outer expectations, but they might struggle to meet expectations that they impose on themselves. So they might go for a run if someone else is waiting for them, or they'll turn up for a gym class if they've booked in, but if there's no one there sort of expecting them, then they probably might not do it themselves. And rebels tend to resist all expectations and so they're more about their identity and having freedom and things like that. So I think knowing yourself, and I would guess that a lot of this group, well, the biggest group in general is obligers, and I think in terms of health practitioners is most likely to be obligers. So people who say things like, I wish I wasn't a people pleaser, or if I could just make time for myself, that they're doing things for other people, meeting everyone else's expectations, but not necessarily building that in for themselves. So I guess if you're in that category, there's no right or wrong, but it's to sort of leverage on that and to build in that accountability. So if you've got that, maybe it's a business goal, maybe you do need some outer accountability. Like maybe you have a coach or a colleague or someone else who's in another practice that you can sort of team up with and have like a little meet up every week and sort of report back of what you've actually progressed with, and those sorts of things might help you enormously.
Yeah, absolutely. So you're really leveraging your natural intrinsic kind of tendencies and nature to harness that to achieve, rather than it be something that you're fighting, and that's sort of working against you. And I think that's very good. And then finally, I think we just wanted to sort of touch on, identifying why you could get derailed, and it's good to plan for this. When things sometimes they're going to go wrong, right? And again, we can look to the past and see, okay, what are the sorts of things that have gone wrong, and we can learn from that. But there's also some common things to look out for, and these are the sort of enemies of achievement. So, if we're looking at, perfectionism, that's, overthinking, or being reluctant to take the final step. So we might have done most things, but that last part induces some anxiety because, when I do that, I'm going to release this, or I'm going to put this out in the world, or I'm going to tell someone about it, then people hesitate, and then they often don't then achieve. So being mindful of those things. One of my personal favorites, that is understanding the difference between a lapse and a relapse in terms of behavior. If you're making a behavioral change or you're trying to achieve something, a lapse, and let's say we take the goal of someone who might be looking to quit smoking. So a lapse might be that they went to a social function and they ended up smoking that night, right? Now the next day, really the decision that they make in the behavior kind of determines whether it's a lapse or a relapse. So a lapse would be if they said, okay, I had one day or one evening where I've derailed a bit. Okay, that happened. That can happen. Now I'm going to get back on course and kind of, and move on. Where a relapse is where the person mentally thinks, well, I've blown it, right? I had 30 days or 6 months, whatever it is, where I hadn't done that. Now I have. And then because of that internal self-talk, they kind of feel like they've failed, and think that, and then they'll continue that behavior, right? So they end up continuing to smoke because they're like, and they give up. And then that's a relapse. They've relapsed into the previous behavior. So if we expect that we have lapses, right? So if you're on a health kick, well, we expect that sometimes that, choc chip, ice cream, which I used to be particularly partial to, that occasionally we may end up, doing that and doing something we don't want. But if we just contain it in our mind, it really empowers us to get back on track and move forward and not beat ourselves up too much about that.
Yeah.
And finally, of course, expect it to be hard, right? The struggle, it is the journey. And, if it was easy, everyone would be doing it. That's that kind of, quote that I think is good to have in our head, but it's going to be hard at times. And if we expect it, and, that means that when we hit those hard times, we're like, yep, I knew that was coming, and let's see, I'll do my best at getting through that. And so, it better mentally prepares us for it. And then finally, I think when to persevere and when to change course. I think this is something that it's not always easy, is it, to know?
No, because we all hear stories about I don't know, crazy people that persevere with something too long, and they should have seen the light of day. And changed course and pivoted. But conversely, I think most of us give up a bit too early, and I guess I really internalized this when I was climbing Everest. And when you climb big mountains, there's this concept of a turnaround time. So the idea is to keep people safe when we, to stop them from getting carried away and keep heading towards the summit way too late in the day. That doesn't give them time enough to get home and enough energy to get back to their last camp. And many lives have been lost because they've done that. So nowadays, most people would set themselves a time that they, commit to turning around and start heading back. So, but when I was actually on my summit attempt, I left Camp 4 at about 10 p.m. at night. So that's what you do. You sort of climb all through the night with the idea that you'll reach the summit sometime in the morning, and then you've got the rest of the afternoon to get yourself back down. And so I left at 10 p.m. at night, but after only a few hours, I was just feeling so fatigued, so weak. I was going so slowly. I felt I was going so slowly, that I would have no chance of making it. I was literally taking, people wouldn't believe how slowly I was going. I was, literally taking 2 or 3 steps and having to bend over double and just gasp for air. Wow. And, I now know that this is kind of what must be what everyone else is doing as well, because as it turned out. Yeah. But, I felt that there was no chance I could keep going. But at some point I sort of remembered my turnaround time, which I had set at midday actually. So I thought, well, I should just keep going until that turnaround time. Wow. I should, see how far I can get before, turning around. And as it turned out, my judgment was completely out, and I was on the summit before 8 a.m. But so it just shows you just don't know. You shouldn't sort of evaluate until you reach an evaluation sort of point. Yeah. And I think many things in life are like that. Like if you, I don't know, in marketing, things take a long time to actually show results, or the right kinds of results. So say I know people that have, decided, okay, I'm going to give this social media marketing a go. And they, put out 2 blog posts or 2 Facebook posts or whatever it might be. And then they say, oh, I only got 1 like, or, maybe they even got a comment that wasn't super positive, or, my followers haven't gone up, or, things like that. But that's just, way too early to evaluate that kind of effort. It takes, months of consistency to sort of, before you should sort of evaluate something like that. And that's only one example, but I guess it really brought home the concept to me of you keep going until, and then you predefine what that until what is.
Yeah. So the focus then, until you get to that, the focus is on performing the action. Is that right? Like performing the action that logically will get you there. But you're only checking in to decide whether to continue or not at those defined points. Otherwise, I guess every time you perform the action, it almost becomes like an evaluation point, doesn't it? If you don't do this,
exactly,
right? It's like,
which comes back to the overthinking. Like it's kind of like you just get lost in your own, thoughts about this. But I guess to some extent, stop thinking about it. Just keep doing it until this.
Yes. Yeah. That makes, and I think that gets around, doesn't it? A lot of the reason people fall off, fall away, is they end up evaluating, this is not working, lose motivation, and so forth. So no, it's a really powerful point. Now, I think that might actually, let me just click through, but I believe that is our last slide for today. So really the take home message here, is really about focusing kind of on the action, and that first action for you to perform is actually around defining the goals. So put it in your calendar. That is the action, please. If you're watching this now, get it into your calendar to set your goals. And do the things that may be that book out in your calendar when you're going to take your holidays, and book in your calendar time to review your goals, so that if you've got a weekly 1 hour spot that you can take out now, which will be your goal setting and review, then do that, and do it now, so that you've taken some action, create some space, keep those goals sort of front in mind, and those tiny
with your
steps.
Little reminders, post-it notes, screensavers, all that kind of thing.
Yeah, And those little steps, before you know it, they will have added up, to something significant. And yeah, so look, thank you, very much, and thank you, Fiona. It's been great co-hosting, this and a topic that I know is very near and dear to your heart. So thank you very much for sharing your knowledge, today with us. And to everyone, thank you. If we can help you with anything, or you have any questions, do email us, and we'll also make this presentation available for you to, we'll send out a copy as well for those who are registered to the webinar. Very good. Thank you, and goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.